We may hear some grim stuff about what Brexit will look like when it's stripped of the bullshit, but I just wanted to say there is some good news. Part of the good news is you're all here. People are energised and enraged, and young people in particular, as Richard nodded to, are particularly angry about where we are and what's happening to this great country of ours. So that, I would say, is some good news, at least to take home. And it's been quite a week, as Richard said. I mean, the European Union have made it clear they do not believe the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom when he says he's negotiating seriously. Philip Hammond, a former Chancellor of the Exchequer, and John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, agree about nothing much, but they do agree that they think Boris Johnson is not telling the truth. I agree with them. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today, which is essentially actually something slightly bigger than Brexit. It is the normalisation of lying in our public life, which I think is the same. And if the people who've lied to us about Brexit win this, they will lie to us about something else. The future of the NHS, the school system, I don't know what it will be, but you can bet that this is the entry-level examination for Trumpland, and we don't want to pass it. When I was talking to the publishers about Brexit Without the Bullshit, this was my working title, and I thought that maybe that wasn't a good title, not just because of the obvious swear word, but because if you took away all the lies, maybe there would be a book full of blank pages. But fortunately, there's quite a lot of stuff in there. The thing is that when I voted in 2016, I didn't really know what Brexit meant. And I don't think anybody knew what Brexit meant. Nobody told us. And they have gone out of their way not to tell us since. Even when the Yellowhammer files were leaked to the Sunday Times, they pretended they were out of date. They're from August, last month. The biggest sin in British political life would appear to be to get caught out telling the truth. Ask Sir Kim Darroch, a very, very fine diplomat, doing work for Britain for many, many years, had to resign as our man in Washington because he told the truth, which is that the Trump administration is dysfunctional. And this is not exactly top secret. You can read about it in the newspapers. And he had to leave. So why I wanted to write the book was I wanted to at least try to find out what would Brexit really look like. Not the Narnia version, but the real version. And not only that, is it worthwhile telling people the facts? Do we still live in an enlightened country? Is this still a country which values facts and knowledge and truth and science? Or is it a country where climate change denial, anti-vaccination movements and other things can somehow not just survive and thrive by telling us what is fundamentally nonsense? And just to give you one example of what I think of as our kind of unenlightenment and how it affects Brexit itself. I had a 4-week campaign as part of Change UK, one of the many parties saying that we had to remain. And it was really enlightening to me for many reasons. But one was when I was canvassing in the centre of London, near Oxford Street, a 30-year-old woman came up to me and said, "I'm not going to vote for you, I'm going to vote for Nigel Farage." And I said, "Do you mind me asking why?" And she said, "Because the European Union is completely undemocratic." So I said, "You're voting in an election for a European Parliament for a person who's been there for 20 years. Could you point out all the undemocratic bits of that sentence?" And she said, "I hadn't quite thought of it like that." Now, she didn't give me her vote. I'm absolutely sure about that. But you just have to ask yourself why it is that such nonsense has gained such currency. And it's not just, the Bendy Bananas story and Boris Johnson writing about the EU's trying to ban British bangers. It has become so pervasive. An otherwise sensible, I think, normal kind of human being has swallowed absolute nonsense and is voting in an election which he somehow thinks is undemocratic. Now, as Richard said, this isn't my first book, but it is the first book I've ever written that was reviewed before it was even available. Because when Amazon had a little thing saying you can buy Brexit Without the Bullshit, a review appeared before the publishers had sent out the book. And I thought I'd read this review to you. It says, "Dangerous propaganda in an illiterate package. There is every chance this assembly of extremist fantasies will prove of adequate sophistication to appeal to today's rabid left-wing extremists." That's you, by the way. "To the even slightly educated, it will appear too crass and vulgar to bear. This book is the product of a man who projects his fantasies over reality almost to the degree of psychosis." That's me. Not fake news, but fake reviews. But it's very interesting, is it not, that from the Prime Minister himself down to some anonymous fake reviewer on Amazon, we kind of tolerate what has become the normalization of lying in our lives. Boris Johnson, as we know, has a track record of lies. He was fired twice, once by the Times for making up quotes and once by Michael Howard. Now, as Prime Minister, he wants to prorogue Parliament. He says to get on to his exciting agenda on crime and the NHS, including 20,000 new police officers, a statement which clearly caused one police officer at least to faint, because 21,000 police officers have been taken out of our streets in the past few years. But what's interesting about that was that the Ipsos Mori poll, which followed his statements, showed that 70% of British people do not believe the Prime Minister. 70% of us don't believe the Prime Minister. I don't know who the other 30% are, actually, but perhaps if you know any, perhaps they're demonstrating with Tommy Robinson down the road. So the book was a simple idea. Forget the rhetoric, forget the nonsense, forget every vacuous cliche, you know, the Norway plus and Canada plus plus. I mean, what was the plus? What is the plus? With every Brexit, you get a free glass of wine or a coffee in the morning or something. So it's not... I suppose I should say, quoting Ivor Richards, the one thing that we all need to know and we need to talk to our Brexity friends about is that Brexit is not an event. It is a process. And if by some miracle we do crash out on October 31st, which I don't believe, by November the 1st, Brexit will begin, and it will be years and years, not just of pain, but of listening to boring conversations about how wonderful it's all going to be if we just believe. So let's have a quick look at the facts. One of the facts is that it occurred to me that Mrs. Thatcher is an underachiever, because Mrs. Thatcher defeated the miners, neutralised trade union power, privatised state assets, including council houses, revitalised the City of London, helped win the Cold War, and defeated the Argentine junta. But this is a limited series of ambitions compared to Boris Johnson, because if he gets his way, he will rewrite simultaneously our foreign, economic and trade policies, with a profound impact on everything from the NHS to the food we eat, if we can find it, to nursing and social care, to the vets that we have in this country, to our jobs and investments, to universities, which I care deeply about, and the soft power of being brainy Britain, a country that the world has in the past looked up to, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Some more facts, just a couple of quick ones. Most of the people who pick our seasonal fruit that we've enjoyed through this summer, most of them are EU 27 nationals. 95% of the vets who certify meat fit for slaughter in our slaughterhouses are EU 27 nationals. Our food standards are seriously at risk from any trade deal we have with the United States. Chlorinated chicken, I've eaten chlorinated chicken. Chicken seems to be the flavour of the month in the Conservative Party in a way today, doesn't it? With that stupid campaign about Mr. Corbyn. But chlorinated chicken is the good stuff. 70% of antibiotics in the United States are given to farm animals. Lord O'Neill, from Goldman Sachs, who conducted an inquiry into this, said they're handed out like sweets. Ractopamine in pork is banned in almost every country in the world, obviously in the EU, therefore obviously in Britain, banned in Russia, banned in China, permitted in the United States. Google it, it's horrible. There are 60,000 pork producers in the United States, in 42 states. That means 84 members of the US Senate will listen to the pork lobby. The pork lobby, and this is freely available, have a look at it, the US Trade Representative had hearings pharmaceutical industry and others were involved. Very interesting hearings. The pork lobby said that the price of a trade deal with the United States has to be that pork, American pork, will come to Britain. Now, you may not eat pork, you may not care. That's just one example, however. And I promise you that much as I can imagine Liz Truss really cuts a dash in Washington, 84 US senators are paying much more attention to the pork lobby. So perhaps if you like ribs, get them in now. The pharmaceuticals we get, insulin, we know all about insulin. It's all produced by EU27. Gentlemen, Viagra, if you need it, stock up now. It's all produced in a place called Ringaskiddy, County Cork. I've never been there, but I think it's a great place. International driving permits. Maybe some of you have already done this. When we were supposed to crash out a few months ago, I went to the post office because I had to go to Spain. They said you might need an international driving permit, but are you going to Spain, Malta, or Cyprus? Because they have a 1-year international driving permit. It's £5.50. It looks like a ration card from World War II. So I got one of those. And I said, what about the other EU 24? They said, that's a separate international driving permit. Now, this is £5.50 for each one. It's not a huge amount of money. And if you can afford to travel, you can afford to buy it. We don't need to do it now. And it's just a symbol of all the little bureaucracies that will change our life. Another one is the EU visa waiver system known as ETIAS. ETIAS will apply to the UK as a third country post-Brexit. €7 for a 3-year visa waiver, like a visa, only with the word waiver added. That's the official, what's the tweet from Jean-Claude Juncker's spokeswoman. Reciprocity. I've been talking quite a bit to people in the south of Spain who've retired there. Reciprocity means we get the same deal, kind of, with healthcare there as we would do here. There are many people who are worried about it. As a Spanish journalist put it to me, and again, like Richard, I don't want to cause any offense, but this is what he said. We send you our young Spanish people to work, you send us your old people to die. There we are. And ultimately, the other big thing, the elephant in the room, is the unity of the United Kingdom, which has already been damaged, as Richard rightly said, is in severe danger. I've just come back from Edinburgh. I was at Edinburgh Festival for about a week. Scotland will see a tide of SNP votes. I don't think there'll be any Conservative MPs re-elected in Scotland. Scotland will have another independence referendum. And a friend of mine who's been a unionist all his life said, do you know what the Conservative option will be? To vote to leave the United Kingdom and stay in the European Union. Now, that's an anecdote. It's not science, but it's something that somebody who I've known for years and has always been a unionist said, and it shocked me. And then there's the hard skills of Britain that are admired around the world. We get things done. We're a competent, wonderful country. We've got the best universities, some of them, in the world. We have got, there's one Cambridge College that's got more people who've had Nobel Prizes than all of Japan and China put together. It's a pretty good record. From President Rafsanjani of Iran, who went to Glasgow Caledonian University, to Bill Clinton, to many other world leaders, they come here because we offer something great. And even if you don't go to university, even if your kids don't go to university, even if you don't know anybody who goes to university, this is good for our country. So let me just give you a quick roundup of how Britain is currently being seen in some foreign newspapers and elsewhere. In Germany, Jacob Rees-Mogg was described in what is the German equivalent of The Economist, a very sober magazine, as possibly a future Prime Minister. I laughed at that, but I laughed at the next bit even more. They also called him das lebende Fossil, the living fossil. I thought was fair comment, actually. In Ireland, Boris Johnson's characterisation of the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic as being not much different from the border between Westminster and Islington caused a degree of amusement, I have to say. In the United States, the New York Times did a page and a half on a man they call Failing Grayling. Actually, one of the mysteries, maybe somebody in the room can sort it out for me later. How do you get to be Chris Grayling? I mean, how do you... In Russia, satirical TV programs have said it's not just Putin's cunning plan, the British are doing it to themselves. In France, there was some amusement that our previous, one of many rotating Brexit secretaries, Dominic Raab, currently Foreign Secretary, didn't seem to know that Calais and Dover had some kind of relationship. There was the French government minister, you may remember, who nicknamed her cat Brexit because it couldn't decide whether to go out or stay in. I tried at home to tell my wife I was going to nickname our dog Farage because he leaves a pile of crap behind in somebody else's there. But that was vetoed. So let me just take a step back to what really inspired the book. Every November in Wasdale in Cumbria, there's a pub that holds the world's biggest liar competition. And they say that two professions are forbidden. One is lawyers, apologies lawyers, the other is journalists. No, it's not, it's politicians. It could have been, I wondered why it wasn't journalists. Now, of course, this is a bit of a laugh in a public house. But in our public life, I would say to you, having known politicians for decades, most politicians try to tell the truth almost all the time. I genuinely believe that. Very few tell whoppers. I don't care about lying in a public house, but I do care very much about lying in public life. If you are a doctor or a farmer or a teacher and you lied the way some of our leaders do, you will lose your job. When Volkswagen lied about diesel emissions, the CEO lost his job and the share price went down, I think, by a third almost overnight. In the 19th century, there was a British Colonial Office statesman called Sir Henry Taylor who wrote that falsehood ceases to be falsehood when it is understood on all sides that the truth is not expected to be spoken. And it worries me that that's where we are. Because I spent 1 year of my life on one lie, which was Bill Clinton saying, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. One lie almost brought down the president. And yet, it seems to me, for many of us, that fits into the category of falsehood isn't falsehood when people don't really expect the truth. Churchill said, in wartime, truth is so precious, she must always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. And I think he was right. In World War I, do you know why tanks are called tanks? They're called tanks because we, clever British, pretended there were methods of taking water to the front line. And then suddenly a gun popped out and started shooting at people. Lying seems to me to have its place in even our public culture, but not the way it is now. Any reader of the Washington Post, for example, will know that every 3 months they do an assessment of how many lies the President of the United States has told. On the 12th of August, they said, President Trump has made 12,019 false or misleading claims over 928 days. That's an average of 13 a day. The man is a workaholic. We know some of the lies. You know, build the wall, make Mexico pay for it. He said recently that he knows that this hurricane is going to hit the United States, it's going to hit Alabama. Not the right state, just not true. And he's been corrected on it, and he keeps repeating it. Charles Blow of the New York Times said, Donald Trump lies all the time. We know that. Some of us are incensed and disgusted by this, others have been worn out by it. But few even attempt to deny or excuse it anymore. It has simply become a recognized feature of the man and a predicament for the country. And I would say to you that that is true of Boris Johnson. And I think that's very sad for our country. And what is remarkable is that the misstatements from the President, and to a degree from Boris Johnson, are so easily checkable. Absolutely astonishing. I mean, he claimed to have been against the 2003 Iraq war. He was publicly for it. He boasted about his popular inauguration. We all saw the crowds. He claims that Americans pay the highest taxes in the world. They don't, and so on and so on. My favorite is, last Christmas he tweeted he was hard at work in the Oval Office. When a president is hard at work in the Oval Office, there's a Marine Guard you can see from the public road on Philadelphia Avenue. There was no Marine Guard. He was on the golf course. It reminds me, there's an old Chico Marx gag about who you're going to believe, me or your own eyes. And Boris Johnson this week has said, when in Aberdeenshire, there's going to be no problem we will be able to export British beef to America, but they won't expect to be able to export any beef to our country. I mean, hello. And yet, 40% of American voters still apparently back Mr. Trump. So I'm going to conclude very quickly by just giving you a quick idea of why I think that is true and what we can learn about it. I think Donald Trump is a great communicator. He communicates in tweets and other methods by touching people in their feelings, not with facts. Make America great again. Great statement. Can't think of anything from Hillary Clinton that you could put on a hat. She had policy documents coming out of her ears, but nothing that connected that way. And in the 2016 election campaign, Newt Gingrich, former Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives, said something very interesting, which is rather like something that we heard from Michael Gove here. They're both very clever people. And Gove, you will remember, said, the British people have had enough of experts. Well, Gingrich was challenged that Donald Trump, candidate Trump, was lying about crime, violent crime going up. And he said, no, it's not true. And the CNN presenter said, no, it is true. Gingrich retorted, the average American this morning does not think violent crime is down. The current view is that liberals have a whole set of statistics that theoretically may be correct, but that's not where human beings are. People feel threatened. I'll go with how people feel. Now, rather like the experts' comment, it sounds like nonsense. But this is a challenge, and it's why I wanted to have a book about the facts about Brexit. Because I feel that the Earth is flat. I know it's not, but for all intents and purposes in this room, the Earth feels to us as if it's flat. And when the lies on the Brexit bus said 350 million for the EU every week, we know that was false. But the bit underneath said, let's fund the NHS instead, which touched us, or touched some people. And they were prepared, they're not stupid, they were prepared to forget the facts in order to get in touch with feelings. And so I just want to leave you with one thought. Those of us who want to defeat Brexit, because any Brexit will be bad for our country and will pull it apart, and I think could mean the end of the United Kingdom, have got to argue the facts, which is why I put them in the book. But we've got to do so in such a way that we get in touch with how people feel about this country. And that is very difficult because its facts can sometimes seem boring. But I would urge you all to think about how we can get in touch with the pride most of us feel in our country, the pride that Brexiters feel in our country, and get in touch with their feelings as well as their facts. Thank you.